Back in the early 90s, Naughty Dog was signed onto Universal Interactive to make 3 games for them after showing The Way of the Warrior. In August 1994, Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin began their move to Los Angeles, California. During the trip, Gavin and Rubin decided to create a 3D action platformer, taking inspiration from 16-bit era games such as Donkey Kong Country, Mario, and Sonic. After moving into the Universal Interactive backlot, Gavin and Rubin met with Mark Cerny discussing the design of the game and made an agreement to go into production. After many things changed throughout development, this game was released in September 1996 as Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot for the longest time was a series that intrigued me. I heard about this game a lot of times on the YouTube landscape and from YouTubers I watch, but what was holding me back was that I was a Nintendo boy, so I would play things on Nintendo consoles like Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, and the best trilogy of all time, Xenoblade Chronicles, I mean, let's be honest. And B, after seeing people talk about how hard the game is, it just turned me off back then. But after a certain video game caused me to try out new games like the Insomniac Spider-Man games, The Last of Us, Mega Man, etc., I bought Crash Insane on my recently built PC and had a fun time with it. Though this video will be the first time I play the original Crash on PlayStation, so this will be a fun and frustrating time, I feel, so let's get into it. The story of Crash Bandicoot is a very simple one at the end of the day. The mad scientist Dr. Neo Cortex uses Elovo Ray, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, to genetically alter the local wildlife into an anthropomorphic army of soldiers for the purpose of world domination. Among these soldiers is an Eastern Barred Bandicoot named Crash, who Cortex selects to be the general of his army. Crash is rejected by the Cortex Vortex and is chased out of Cortex's castle, plummeting to the ocean below, as Cortex prepares Tana to be used in Crash's place. Now it is up to Crash to go to Cortex's castle/tower thing and get back to his babe, if you know what I mean, while defeating the Doctor in the process. This is quite a simple plot like most platformers back in the 90s, but it does give us a main reason to want to defeat Cortex, and that's what a game like a platformer should give us at the bare minimum, so I shouldn't complain that much. The graphics of Crash Bandicoot are impressive for its time. I think that it is no lie that PS1 era games haven't really aged the best graphically, with 2D faring a bit better because it was more understandable. Crash Bandicoot, I would say, is one of the best looking PS1 games I have played. The game is composed of linear hallways to cover up loading, which was a common thing in this era of gaming, with most games using stuff like fog to hide the loading in the geometry, but not really in this game. The game also has some cutscenes that are quite impressive for the time while trying to go for that Saturday morning cartoon feel like the Looney Tunes, and I think it gets all the attention it deserves. The soundtrack in this game is good, but it's one I rarely go back to on occasion. The music composed for the game went through the PlayStation's built-in sequencer, making the songs MIDI files with low-quality samples. The songs in the original Crash are recognizable and are good, but there isn't anything here that will keep me from coming back to it, unlike Crash 3 or Wrath of Cortex. But there are some great listens in here. The gameplay in Crash Bandicoot is very simple. Crash Bandicoot plays a lot like a platformer did back in the day. He can move the D-pad, jump with the cross button, and spin with the square button. If you are wondering, the first Crash game doesn't support dual analog support, so I recommend that you play this game with an original PS1 controller than the DualShock controller. The controls for Crash work for what this game is trying to be, a 2D game with the camera behind you. Though I will say that being used to how Crash plays in the Insane trilogy, it took me a while to get used to how Crash played in this version. The more limited directions definitely took a while to get used to, but it's not a deal breaker at all. Jumping is also one that didn't take that long to get used to, but I felt like Crash's jump was too stiff. When you are moving Crash during a jump, it barely moves and can barely go in any direction. Now this is a deal breaker in the more 2D levels, but in the levels with hallways, it can be a challenge. Overall, the controls are not bad, but can be improved in a sequel, which can wait till Crash 2. Levels in Crash are like any platformer back in the 90s. You start out one spot, then you go to the end of the level. Your standard A to B levels that are your typical platformer. There are parts where you need to choose a path to go down, and it can be a really simple one, or one that makes you question why you played this. The levels in this series are well known for being some of the hardest levels in gaming, to the point that when the Insane Trilogy came out, it was called the Dark Souls of platforming, which will never be funny to think about. But what I think makes the levels considered hard is the mix of the stem jumping with the near type platforming you need to do, but that isn't a bad thing because you can't get used to the controls and give the levels a few problems unless you go for cool completion. To reach full completion in this game, you have to break every box that is in the levels. Now, that doesn't sound like a problem, but there are two things that make 100%ing this game kind of not fun. One, you must have every color gem to complete certain stages to grab every box. Backtracking is something that I don't like in video games because it is either the most tedious thing to do in the game or the backtrack isn't worth it because you don't get something substantial. The only times backtracking works is in a game like a Metroidvania, where backtracking can lead you to new areas, new abilities, and more content. So when you need to grab a certain thing just to get another gem that does nothing new, just doesn't feel compelling to complete. There is also backtracking within levels to get all the boxes, with the first level and Cortex Power being the standout examples. 2. There are strict limitations to getting a gem in this game. To get the gem, you must go through the entire level and destroy every box in that level. Now, this can be annoying in some levels like Cortex Power, but it shouldn't be that bad. But there is one thing that needs to be said. You cannot die once in the level or else you don't get the gem. There are also bonus rooms where you have to grab each individual emblem and then break every box without dying, because if you die, you have to restart the level and then you are going to suffer more. So that means to 100% this game, you have to break every box, not die, lose your sanity, go to therapy, and then blink and you find yourself in rehab. And finally, number 3. The 100% completion reward is not all that worthwhile. Normally, 100% completion rewards are not the worthwhile thing in most games, unless your name is Spyro the Dragon or Spyro Year of the Dragon. And this game is a big reason why. If you get every gem in the game, then you could get a secret ending, which isn't a bad idea, just that it doesn't mean anything, because you got the ending that literally has Crash and his babe flying into the sunset. And the fact that this is the canon ending because Crash 2 goes for the original ending just makes it not all that worthwhile in my eyes. So whenever I tell people to play this game, I just tell them to play it not to 100% completion, just casually, because it's just a better experience that way. Bosses in the Crash games aren't the best things in the world, but there are good ones in the games I played, but I can't say that for Crash 1 or Crash 2. Crash 1 at least has the excuse of being the first game in the series. Papu Papu is painfully simple to the point that it's boring. Ripperoo just takes forever to the point that it's boring. Koala Kong is a pretty good boss with a pattern that is shaken up a bit with each hit. Pinstripe Potaroo, I don't know how you say it. I just don't know. It's just this. I don't need to tell you that this is boring. Dr. Nitrous Brio is actually a good one and really gets you to be on your toes as the fight progresses, but Cortex is my favorite boss in this game because of that climactic feeling that comes out of you for having to travel all the way to his castle to defeat him and save your girl. But other than that, it's kind of a mixed bag of bosses, I feel. Not as bad as Crash 2, but yeah, we'll get to that later. Overall, while I see a game that can be enjoyed, I can't really say it's held up well. The graphics look impressive for the time, the soundtrack has some hummable tunes, and and while it takes a while to get used to the controls, it still can be fun. But when this game is low, it's not all that fun to go through. The levels can be a little too long for my liking. The overall completion for breaking all the boxes just so you can get the gems may seem worth it until you realize it's for an ending that is disappointing. And the bosses are the low point of the game, with them being too simple or too boring, with there being exceptions. Now, that's not to say I hate this game, because the pros and cons do negate each other. It makes it a mid to okay game, I feel. And it is the first game in the franchise, so I can't really blame them that much, but it's not one I'm going to go back to much often.